So either way, you think this is one of the major Celtic people groups that are left? Irish, Scottish.
Yeah.
Like how confident are you on that? These,
I mean,
like pale skinned, most of them are freckle faced, just absolutely bright red hair. How confident? Like a rating of 1 to 10.
I mean, I would say 1 for at least every charm that's in a bowl of Lucky Charms. I mean, that's how high on that.
Oh my goodness. No, these are the Udmurt people.
Welcome to the Gospel Alliance podcast. The Gospel Alliance podcast is, of course, part of Wokepedia, which is what you're probably used to listening to. And so we've added this in. We try to do one of these at least, about once a month or so. Sometimes we get a little crazy and might throw 2 in there. Sometimes I forget to announce the right podcast. And so you might not realize it's Gospel Alliance. But today we remembered, and it is the Gospel Alliance podcast. How are you doing today, Kyle?
We talked a little bit before the show, got a lot going on, but overall doing good. God is still on the throne, so it can't be bad. And how are things going with you, Sam?
You know, I'm going to give a good Midwestern answer. I like to answer kind of fun once in a while. And so I'm going to say things are fair to Midland. I don't think there's any more of a Midwestern answer than that. Fair to Midland. Maybe finer than frog's hair would be more Midwestern. And Kyle, have you ever seen a frog's hair?
I have never seen a frog's hair.
That's because it's real fine. It's real fine. So, I always like to tell people those ones. Yeah. You know, the problem is that I was a chaplain in a nursing home. And so I learned all of these great ways to answer, how are you doing? From men who are much older and wiser than me in their ways of answering how you're doing. And anyway, it gets people to look at me kind of strange sometimes. But what are we going to be talking about today? Because I'm already digging myself a hole, so I'll kick it back over to you.
So what we're talking about today, this is going to be a part 1 episode. So we're doing right now Gospel Alliance because we wanted to cover from specifically just the biblical perspective. What is ethnos? What is ethnicity? What is nation? What is a nation? And then in part 2, next week, we're going to cover it from Wokepedia's side. So how is ethnos abused by woke people, but also kind of how people get it wrong in general and the need to correct that. But we felt that it was important to have a week where we just go to God's word, we define it, refine it, make it a useful term so that we can then examine things through the lens of a proper biblical definition. And we think we're going to have a lot of fun this week. Please stay tuned with this. There's going to be some interesting things that we do. But yeah, Sam, what exactly are we going to cover? Get us started with this.
Yeah, well, first of all, let's just look at the definition of ethnos, which is the word that is sometimes translated nation. While doing a little bit of study of this, I found out that it's actually not necessarily translated nation primarily, although some would have you believe that. Some would have you believe some other things that we're going to really get into next week as well. But I went to the Strong's Concordance. That's, if you're going and you're studying God's word, it seems like this is just probably a really common study tool. So one that you might even have at home. And this is the definition of the word ethnos, the Greek word ethnos. And it means this: a race as of the same habit, a tribe, especially a foreign, non-Jewish one, usually by implication pagan, Gentile, heathen, nation, or people. And as you can probably hear from the word ethnos, we're going to take this is where we get the word ethnicity from, but that's really where we're going to be using that interchangeably. But as we were getting ready for this podcast, there's one thing that you noted specifically, Kyle, was that if you look up the word ethnicity, in a multiple dictionaries, the one thing that is the consistent trait is that it's often not consistently defined, or it's defined simply by synonyms often.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, it's something that's hard to nail down. It's one of those things where we can identify it faster than we can define it. But even
right,
our identifying still requires a definition to give kind of the framework for it.
right. And so when we're looking at this, we're going to look at this in a few different ways. We're going to look at this, I would say, as a people group, and then we're also going to look at it as a nation, because those seem to be the two types, the two really broad general ideas as to how this word is used. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, and I think some people might be a little bit confused what you just said there, because some people are going to go, "Well, you said people and nation group aren't those the same thing?" Um, but we're talking about people group, and we're talking about nation as in the idea of a not a political entity, but a national entity, because people apply it to like the nation of blank, the nation of Israel, the nation of, well, no one says the nation of the United States, but
Right,
the nation of England, the nation of France, things like that. So we need to talk about how does it relate when we talk about that sort of nation? How does it relate when we talk about people group? We need to put some definitions and edges on this to its multiple key thing, multiple meanings.
right. And even I think as I read the Strong's definition, you can see that it's used in multiple ways,
Mm-hmm.
often dependent upon the context that are there in scripture. And so we're going to try to
Mm-hmm.
put some verses in context. Well, we're not going to try. We are going to put some verses in context. And I think it will help you grasp this. And if you really get the good foundation for this, we're really going to apply it to see where people are abusing it next week. And so you're going to be able to see how do you apply biblical truth to the culture. But we need to get into this. And as
Yeah.
we're going to get into this, we're doing something a little bit different today. I'm excited for this. We're going to be playing a game.
Oh,
Do we
I'm
have a name
excited
for
for
the game,
this.
Kyle?
Um, no, I didn't come up with a name, and I can't think of something that satisfies my dad's sense of humor at the moment. So we're just going to get into it. But normally, we don't do things that are visually, it's necessary to see it visually.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need the visuals of this. But if you're listening to this podcast on audio, I would really encourage you to go to YouTube, Rumble, Spotify even has the video if you go to Spotify itself
That's right.
and watch at least this segment because it'll make this more interesting. Now, what this game is simply I'm going to be showing a picture, and Sam, don't overcomplicate it, but just you're allowed to think a tiny bit. But I'm going to ask you
Just
what
guess.
ethnicity is the
Yeah.
person and or people. Sometimes there's multiple
Right.
people. What
And I haven't
ethnicity
seen these
are they?
pictures ahead of time.
Oh,
I
okay, let
haven't.
me just.
Yeah, I haven't seen these pictures ahead of time, so I'm excited for this game. And while Kyle's getting that queued up, this is the perfect time to remind you that we want to hear from you. And so you can contact us at contactwokepedia@gmail.com. Once again, it's contactwokepedia@gmail.com. And let us know what you think about this episode, because this episode and next week episode are going to be really key, dealing with worldview, specifically on biblical anthropology, the study of man. Within that realm of ethnicity, it's going to have a lot to do with critical race theory. It's going to have a lot to do with that kind of an aspect of what's being driven throughout our world. And so let us know what you think about it. And if you don't like what we said, let us know about that too. Just address it to Kyle, not me.
Oh, okay. That thanks.
No problem. I'm always
So
good at
the
throwing people under the bus. So,
the whole idea is before we really get into ethnicity, uh, wanted to stretch your minds a little bit of how you see ethnicity because I think the modern ideas of scientific race, so race, the idea of race that's rooted in evolution, that was dominant in the 20th century, and now sociological race rooted in critical race theory, this idea as race as a social construct, have warped because we so often ethnicity and race were used as synonyms, and historically at one
Right.
point they were synonyms, but you have to go back several hundred years to hit that point. It's left us with a little bit of a taste of ethnicity that I want to stretch a little bit, and this is going to be fun. Uh, Quirks of language and ethnicity are something I find fascinating. But Sam, if you had to guess an ethnicity for these four women, they're all the same ethnicity. What would you guess?
I mean, it looks extremely European to me. Um,
Well, that's not a ethnicity. You have to go to an actual
do you have to name a
ethnicity.
country?
You have to name a people group. Yes.
I would say they look like they're from England. I mean,
Okay, is that your final answer?
that's my final answer. I mean, it they look very very
Nope.
white, but not Norse. So
Nope.
yeah,
Nope.
where are they
You
from?
are wrong. These are Magyars. These are Hungarians.
What?
Yeah, they're Hungarians. How did you not know that? Wasn't that obvious? Uh, so let's go on to the next one.
Okay.
Okay, you got this man here. If you had to try and put an ethnicity, uh, and try and be more specific than something like sub-Saharan African, European's not acceptable. Large geographic continental region is not acceptable. Give me something.
I'm going to say like I from Congo.
So you think he's Congolese?
Yes.
Uh, no, you'd be wrong. This is a Hungarian. Let me continue on.
Are they
Oh,
all Hungarians? Are
I
they
should
all
probably explain what
Hungarians?
I mean by that. This is because someone's like, "What are you talking about?" No, this is a Megi Arab, not Megi Arab. Magyar, so the uh, native name
What?
for Hungarian. Ab, the Nubian term that means tribe, the tribe of the Hungarians. This is a descendant of uh, Ottoman a Ottoman slave, because let's call it what it was, stealing children from their homes and forcing them to fight in wars. That's slavery. Who then got abandoned in the lower Nile, the upper Nile, and mixed with the native Nubian people, but never lost their knowledge that they were Hungarians. Fascinating. They weren't known about until the 1930s,
Wow.
and they have specific quirks
It,
that
well,
make them.
in like that picture, that man looks like he's from like the heart of Africa.
Mhm. It is a little bit cheating because I did use a guy that's harder to tell because his hair is all whited out and you can't see his eyes, but they have slightly lighter hair
Okay.
and slightly browner eyes,
Okay.
uh,
But that would
hazily
have just
eyes.
I would have just guessed
So
Northern Africa
you can
then.
see kind of
So
hints.
yeah.
But they were isolated for 400 years. But it's fascinating that they never lost their identity. So let's continue on. These people, which if you are
Well,
not seeing this visually, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people with the most just bright red hair that you ever done seen.
yeah, I mean,
Incredibly pale faced.
yeah, I mean, these are my kind of people right here. I like the red hair. You know, my wife's hair is red. My hair is reddish, and our dog's hair is red. Um, and I would guess that they must be from either Ireland or Scotland. They're
Whoa,
interestingly, I
whoa,
think
whoa,
that
whoa,
Scotland has
whoa.
more red hair. You know, I mean, they look
But
like
what
they like
about
Lucky
Wales?
Charms.
Don't forget the Welsh. Come on. If
Well,
you're
we
going to
don't
name
like the
the two other
Welsh.
major.
We don't like the Welsh.
Oh, we have problems now. You are talking to someone who's like some small amount Welsh. I am of the Medlicott family. How dare you? I'm also related to King Duncan of Scotland, the one that dies in Macbeth. So either way, you think this is one of the major Celtic people groups that are left? Irish,
I
Scottish.
yeah, yeah.
Like how confident are you on that? These
I
like
mean,
pale skinned, most of them are freckle faced, just absolutely bright red hair. How confident? Like
yeah,
a rating of 1 to 10.
I mean, I would say one for at least every charm that's in a bowl of Lucky Charms. I mean, that's how high on that.
Oh my goodness. No, these are the Udmurt people from the farthest part of Europe that you can get, right on the edge of the Ural Mountains before you hit into Asia, in Russia. They have never had any genetic contact ever with Celtic people.
That's insane.
Yeah. In fact, they have more red hair per capita, at least it's claimed that they have more red hair per capita than any of the Celtic peoples.
Uh,
Fun fact.
wow.
Would you like to continue on with this? Is this a fun game?
Yeah. I mean, is there more?
There is more. Okay, you got several different people here. Two-part question because we got multiple people. Are these all the same ethnicity or all these different ones? And what ethnicity or ethnicities would you guess? And just you can
Okay.
pick the front. You
So
can pick the front three people since they're the most easiest to see.
yeah. So I mean, my initial would say they're not the same ethnicity, all of them. And I mean, you have, it looks to me like a Native American type. It might not necessarily be Native American, uh, but kind of a Native American, and then also Asian, right? The girl looks Native American to me, and then the guys look like they're probably from, um, mm, I, not quite China. I don't know. A little bit west of there, but I can't think of a country that would be there, but around that Asian area. That's not very specific. Sorry.
No, that's pretty decent. Uh, well, one, they're not. None of them are Native American.
Okay,
They are.
I would guess, especially with like, with what they're wearing and stuff too.
Nope. Not even
Really,
close. These are the all of them are the same. Even the if you look the one lady, you can't really see her very well on the far
right?
right, who has pretty light
Lighter hair.
brown hair. That's not just an effect of the sun either. These are the Selkut people. These are all the same people, and we're not talking like vague large people group. Like these are all the same small people group. They're all immediate together, same tribe. The Selkut people from essentially just over the Ural Mountains from where the Udmurts were. So let's
Okay,
let's
so
continue
I
on.
wasn't too far off on that one then. On
You
my
were
second
further
guess
you were
for the
further
guys.
off than you were. You had to go. You didn't give me anything that put it more north. They're much more
That's
north
true.
and west than
Yeah.
you were saying. Okay, now these two guys. Which ethnicities are? Which ethnicity is the guy on the left? Which ethnicity is the guy on the right? There's kind of a twofer here.
Okay, are they the same ethnicity? Because like, there's no way they're the same ethnicity.
You tell me. I'm not
No,
telling you anything until you give me answers.
they're not the same ethnicity. Um, my mind is really confused on this one because I mean, what in the world
You're
is
making me
going?
happy with how successful this game is going so far.
Well, okay, so I mean, I'm just gonna go with my gut, which my gut is definitely wrong. But the guy on the right, I'm gonna say an Eskimo, but it's more because of what he's wearing. And Yeah, I'm not going to say that, but the guy on the left, I mean, I, I wish his hair was like really blonde because then I feel like I would know exactly where he was from. But I, it, I'm just going to say Russia because like the European side of Russia.
The European side of Russia. Do you think he's a European Russian?
Yes.
Okay. So we've got Eskimo and Russian.
And to
You
be fair,
are.
he the Eskimo who you're about to tell me is not an Eskimo lo- looks like he's from Mexico and he got cold.
You think he's a Meximo?
We'll go with a Meximo here, but no,
Which I really
he's an
want to. I
Eskimo.
now I want to meet someone who is mixed uh, Mexican and Eskimo because that would actually be very interesting. I'd like to learn their story. No, these are both men from the same people group, same tribe.
No
These are
way.
also both. Yep. These are both Selkut people as well. Uh, and again, that they're from kind of central Siberia, like
Okay,
central western
so
Siberia.
so the guy on the left, I wasn't insanely far off.
Well, except for the fact that he's not Russian.
Yeah,
There might be some Russian admixture in them, but it's not.
I
It's
mean
not
that's
substantial.
you know it's on the same map.
Not the same people though. Okay, next one. I'm throwing in an easy one. Okay, I'm throwing an easy one to break it up before we go to the final one.
There's no easy one in this.
There's no easy one in this. What are you
There's
talking
no
about? This
easy
one's
one in
easy.
this. My mind is playing so many tricks on me. Like I'm like, is this guy from Australia? I have no idea at this point. I'm fairly certain he's not from Australia. Um, if he's from Australia, especially with that background, I mean that was not a nice one to do here. Um, un, this is terrible. I'm gonna go with a northern Native American, and I'm
What in the
wrong.
world is a northern Native American?
Well, I mean
Like
more like in the obviously it's
Canada?
no, not necessarily. Like, but obviously he's not from the Southwest.
So you think like night? So you think like from he's from up where I am?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay,
I,
you need to learn your like. Wow. See, I thought you were gonna say he looks like he's Korean or something.
well, okay, that's
Uh,
what I thought, but like I'm looking at the back, like the backdrop here. I'm trying to I'm trying to get something from the picture, not just the person, because I've noticed that the people are very deceiving.
do you not realize how North Korea actually is?
No, apparently
Like
not. Apparently, I need to work on my geography
it
too,
does
huh?
actually get more snow. Anyway, you're wrong, and wow, you need to learn about Pacific Northwest Native Americans. Uh, but I'm going to give you a list of words, and you're going to have to read them on the episode next time.
Uh oh.
And no, this and neither is this man Korean. This is a Nanette uh, person from very northern, from the Arctic coast of Siberia.
What?
Okay, last one. What 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 ethnicity is this little girl? I threw this one in
Um,
there partially because
I'm gonna say
like
Romanian.
what she looks Romanian. Okay, you're just kind of going out there. I like it though. I like the committal. I just think the little like 6-ish-year-old looking girl
I have no idea what I'm
dressed
looking
in that
at, to tell you
outfit.
the
She's
truth.
It's
This
adorable
picture.
little picture. It warms my fatherly heart. Also, she looks like she needs to get warm. But
Yes. I take it she's not from Romania.
no, this is also
Was
a
I
Nanette
closer?
person. No, this is also a Nanette person. This is this man and this little girl are from the same small, isolated people group. We're not talking like a broadly distributed people group with millions of members. No, these two people are the same ethnicity.
Huh.
And again,
Wouldn't
we're
have
not
guessed
talking
that.
about people groups that are
I,
insanely heavily mixed. We're talking about lots of isolation. Now, want me to blow your mind even more?
sure.
Want me to blow your mind even more? Looking through all these, like, look at that, look at that, look at that, look at all these different people. What if I told you that those are all from the same greater people group?
Really?
Those are all from they're all Finno-Uralic people. Now, if people who don't know, the Hungarians, the Magyar people, they actually migrated into Europe from the eastern side of the Ural Mountains, aka they're from Asia originally.
For
Not
like
all
one or two
Asian
of them, that makes
people.
sense.
Well, for Asian people are not. We have an image of what
Yeah.
Asian means.
Mm-hmm.
Not true. And again, those are all from the same people group. Now you can see different admixtures. You can see how being on one side of the Ural Mountains, they got mixed with over time. They got some mixture from Turkic people and Mongolic people, but fascinating to me. And so, what I mean by greater people group, anyone that's wondering what that'd be like saying Germanic peoples. That's the same level of distinction that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's incredible to look at. And
Mm-hmm.
while it doesn't make sense to the eyes or to the mind that you're perceiving, it does make sense when we look at the scope of scripture because well, Kyle, where does ethnicities really come from? Where do we get this in the story in scripture?
Well, when it comes to the scripture itself, where does ethnicity start in a way that can start to fit the definitions that we're talking about? It comes from the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
Before that point, all people were unified under a single language, single
Mm-hmm.
identity, single location. They'd not spread over the earth. They had not diverged linguistically. They were united, and God wanted them to scatter across the earth. He wanted this diversity that he put into humanity to start to take hold, to have the whole earth subdued. And one of the punishments was they'd lose the uh, unity of language.
Right.
So though I think genetic diversity was always there, I think linguistic diversity wasn't the standard plan.
Right.
Obviously, God knew where things were going to go. It's not like it surprised him at all, but that wasn't the original intent. Just like humanity was never supposed to fall, but we sinned. But that's where we see ethnicity. We see the spreading of the nations, and
Mm-hmm.
the idea of nations and peoples begin.
That's right, and it is interesting to go and to really look at that because when we see the Tower of Babel, it's right after God gave mankind civil government in Genesis chapter 9. He goes and gives that, and then it's Genesis chapter 11 that we have the Tower of Babel, and we see that they came together, and instead of using the new tool that God had given them for obedience, they used it for disobedience, and then it was a curse that came, and there was no longer communication that forced them to obey, essentially, to go and to spread out
Mm-hmm.
throughout the world. Um, it and that is where we see different ethnos or different ethnicities really start. Now, should we go over because in that time frame here, that's around the time of Noah, and should we go over the curse of his son, or
The
should we
curse
just
of
leave that?
Ham.
The Curse of Ham?
Are you talking about dispelling the myth that the curse of Ham was a black skin?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just leave it at that is nowhere near what the curse is. And there are so many flaws with that idea because Genesis chapter 6, the story of Noah getting drunk, is one of my, like, if I'm going to go preach somewhere, that's one of my go to things to preach on because it's such a fascinating piece of scripture that is so undervalued and studied and is so useful for demonstrating so much of what it means to read the Bible correctly, what it means to apply proper hermeneutics. And if you somehow get out of that Ham's curse is black skin, oh boy, we got some biblical issues.
Right.
And you're missing the whole point of the story.
And the reason why I kind of want to bring that up is because that's a position that kind of is all over the board, denominationally. It's one of those that I've seen that in almost every stripe of different kind of thought when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to this and approach to the Bible. Uh, but that's not what was happening, and I think it is important to understand the really the ethnos that we're looking at. It really does start there at the Tower of Babel when you go and you have people groups spreading out. And as we're going to see, one of the biggest things with ethnicity and ethnos and that idea is actually language and what language
Mm-hmm.
you're speaking, because that has so much to do with the culture. For instance, if I was speaking, well, I don't know what languages you can speak, Kyle. So, Kyle, if you were speaking in Chinese, I just want you to know I would not understand a word that you were saying. And if you were speaking in Spanish to me, I mean, I might pick up on, El Baño, because I always figured it's good to know to say bathroom just in case you have to go to the bathroom. But um, I wouldn't know what you're talking about. And we would have a tough time
Mm-hmm.
communicating. And it wouldn't matter um, what else we might have in common. There would be a something that would be separating us in there. Is that fair to say?
No, that's totally fair to say. Now, here's a question. Does language automatically make ethnicity?
No.
No. Okay. So what you're saying is there can be times and places when there is a singular ethnicity with multiple languages.
A singular ethnicity with multiple languages. Well, I would have to say depends on what you mean by ethnicity.
I so without going into the details, but here's an example: the Hellenistic Jews were they no longer Jews?
No, they were still Jews. They were still Jews.
Yeah, but they couldn't speak Hebrew; they spoke Greek
Right.
instead.
True. True.
Uh, but it's just to point out that just because you see two people that speak different languages doesn't immediately mean that we've got two ethnicities now.
Right.
There's more factors to consider,
Right.
which is why
Um,
it's why the different dictionary definitions are always like good.
right. And well, and to kind of go along with that, so the word ethnos, which is what we're using here today, it's translated in multiple times. This is from the Strong's Concordance, so this is going to be in the King James. It's used 164 times in the New Testament. And it's used 93 times. It's translated as Gentile. Now that would be a very broad ethnicity, right? I mean, we maybe that's what I should have done for the game, was just went Gentile, Gentile. No, uh, but no, it's a very broad ethnicity because it's anything that it's any person that's not an ethnic Jew. It's used 64 times as nation. It's used 5 times as heathen and 2 times as people. And so we start to look at that. Sometimes it's used in a broad sense as a people group.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's used in a spiritual group too. Heathen would be a spiritual group, not just a people group, but that would be a spiritual group. And then sometimes it's used as a nation, which is kind of interesting. And when we're looking at that idea of Tower of Babel, I think this is an interesting concept because we do see from the Tower of Babel, obviously Gentiles, so that physical ethnic group. We also see different nations then begin. So we see a national ethnic group. And eventually down the road, we do see spiritual ethnic groups that end up starting, of course, from that as well. And so
Hmm.
that's why I do think the Tower of Babel is the perfect place to go and to see the beginning of ethnos and ethnicity. Any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
No, I think that's kind of the key is uh, it really does depend on what you mean, and not in that sidesteppy sort of way, but what definition of ethnos, not a made up definition, not an arbitrary definition. There are
Right.
definitions. Which one are you using? How are you wielding the word? Because that's going to determine what it is we're talking about. And
Right.
I think it's that vagueness of undefined terms that causes a lot of problems in general, but also when we talk about ethnicity.
Hmm.
And it's where some of the confusion between modern usages of the word race and ethnicity come into play, and people mix these and then pull in. It's why that game was fun to play, because it toyed with the idea that there are racial features. I mean, I found it
Right.
fascinating that specifically among the same people, and we're talking small people groups,
Right.
you'd have features, physical features that we normally associate with a singular people group.
Right.
And if you have other
For,
features, then you're now not part of that people group. And yet
yeah.
we see them crossing lines that we don't normally think can be crossed.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, think I guessed. Now, I might not have been the greatest guesser, but I think I guessed from one, two, three, from four different continents in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, it's not just from different groups, but from four different continents. And really, I mean, when you look at the Celtic guess and you compare that there's a European guess at the same time, those are almost two different European, like, we understand that as different features. So that's interesting. But
Hmm.
let's look at a Bible verse here that uses the word
Yep.
ethnos in the term of nation, and I think it's going to help us define what a biblical ethnos, when you're using it in the word nation, would mean. And there's some other interesting things I think we're gonna see from this. But in Acts 17:26, it says this, and he has made from one blood every ethnos, nation, of men who dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and their boundaries and their dwellings. So, how are we to understand a biblical nation? Now, we could probably go for 5 hours on this. Um, but in a short amount of time, how are we to understand this idea of a biblical nation? What are some of the key things there, Kyle, that we see in that verse?
Well, specifically from that verse, we've got it helps us define some of the edges of what an ethnicity and ethnos can be. We've got things such as they're from one blood. That the idea of race, separate races of people, doesn't exist. We all
Right, because
come
this
from all ethnicities come from the same origin, the same point. You got the singular point of Noah and his family. You got the singular point of Adam and Eve.
which this is really important because this really dispels the biblical, or excuse me, the worldview of Darwinism. The biblical worldview
Yeah.
is completely contrary from that. Because we're all from the same place, there is the same intrinsic, equal value that is there. And we cannot go and say, because of either a feature, which is generally what happens, or from a location or whatever it might be, that there is different values. You biblically cannot say that.
Hmm. Yeah. People are not based on their biology, because if it's based on their biology, then we all have the same biology. We're all human
Right.
made in the image of God, and that is an important thing to know. Now, another thing is from that verse, ethnos. I'm gonna put these two together because it kind of puts them together, and I think we can talk about them in this context because there's some comparative things to say here. But an ethnos is bound by time, and an ethnos is bound by location,
Mm-hmm.
the time and place.
Right.
Now, I I've heard people describe that as the rise and fall of nations, as nation states. But is that really what that's saying there? When he was talking about he has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. Is he getting simply at the rise and fall of nations, or is it something a little bit more than that?
I think he's getting into just a little bit more than that. Although I do think that that idea of a biblical or of a nation is included in there as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but we do see just this kind of simple idea that it's not just speaking of a nation in general, but also maybe getting smaller into like the people as well, the actual individuals on that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've seen with that as well, and this kind of goes into the next point. The next point is not just the time that they exist in and how long they exist, because ethnicity is ethnicity stable, or does it morph and change over time?
Oh, I mean, it completely morphs and changes. I mean, because we look at the we look at the society, we look at the culture of an ethnicity. Um, so, for example, because we're going to be talking about language here in just a moment, a little bit more. We've already touched on it. Um, I, if you've ever gone back and read, we'll say, the Federalist Papers, or just a book of quotes from the founding fathers. And this is not very far back in the grand scheme of things when you're talking about America. But when I started doing that, my wife and I started reading through these kind of things several years ago now. We had to read through it with a dictionary.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
this wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
like this wasn't academic papers. This was reading through the Federalist Papers. They were published in the newspaper for dissemination amongst the general public. But we had to use a dictionary and it wasn't just, oh, hey, they're using these big words that we don't understand. It's these words that just they're not used anymore.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it'll be a word that it's still used, but you can immediately go,
That's not right.
they have a different definition. Immediately,
Right.
they have a different definition that's radically different than mine. So you
Right.
have to go look it up.
Right.
And that's not very long ago. Uh,
Hmm.
and sometimes
Now there
it's
was
not
still
even just the
communication. Like
words
I
that
can
are used.
understand what they were saying, but I'm just going to understand the full detail. I had to use a dictionary. Now imagine got a light going on or something there. Uh, but imagine if this was 400 or 800 or 1,000 years, even if you're in the same geographic location.
Yeah. Well, okay. Go onto YouTube and look up uh, historically accurate spoken Shakespeare. So they're reading Shakespeare in the I think it's early modern English at that point. And you one thing you go, oh, okay, so English is a Germanic language. Because my goodness, does it sound much more German. And but it's radical how different it is.
Right.
Radical. And that's not that long ago. And you only have to go 100 years before that. And you'd struggle, really, really struggle to communicate with that person.
Hmm.
So it rapidly changes over time. So that's important to know. But then the last point is on what we get out of the verse is an ethnos, an ethnicity, is also determined by their dwellings. They have a not just a location that they occupy, but they have a land.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean they have a political land, as in they have a refined government system that has control over land. Go to like the Mongols, pre Genghis Khan and getting them to move
Hmm.
across and take land, but they were a nomadic people group that didn't have. They were more tribal society, but they still had their land. Land
Right.
is important to an ethnicity. It is a uniting thing.
Right. And I didn't go and look this word up in the Greek, but also
Mm.
dwellings,
Ooh.
you know, it it could have something to do with literally what they're living inside of. I mean,
Hmm.
and so your
Well, that
architecture that reflects your culture can have a lot to do with your ethnicity.
yeah, and that is a key thing. And again, go back to like the Mongols. What's a word for a house I can say that you immediately go, oh yeah, Mongols, yurt. What's a word that if I say it, you'll go, oh yeah, Native American houses, teepee
Well, yeah.
or wigwam,
Yep.
depending on where you are. Uh, there's certain identifiers
Hmm.
that you connect to a specific people group, and because it goes into the land they live in determines their lifestyle and how they communicate with each other, how they relate to one another. Their houses determine how they live and operate. Again, a nomad versus a Northern European that has to have a much more tighter insulated dwelling versus a uh, Middle Eastern architecture that had open top dwellings so they could go out and uh, catch the cool evening and all these different things. They define a place.
Right.
They help define a people. Now, Sam, there's a couple of things. We've already talked a little bit about one of these, but let's talk about it a little bit more because there's a couple of things that that verse specifically doesn't hit on, but
Right.
still the Bible does in general and are important to helping us define what an ethnicity is, where its boundaries are.
Yeah, well, and that's language, and then the second one there is religion, right? And going and looking at that, and of course, it doesn't matter. Um, it, you can have different languages within within an ethnos or an ethnicity. We've already kind of touched on that, but as a general rule, they're generally speaking the same language. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we see that from the Tower of Babel. That's kind of a major important thing. And we're going to kind of break down there are different types of ethnicities when we go and we look at this depending on the context. But as we look at it
Yeah.
as a generalized people group within a geographical bound, okay, within a specific time, they're generally going to have the same language, and that's going to be
Mm-hmm.
very big and very important. And that's why if you go back, and it doesn't matter, you actually see this several times within the Old Testament. But I'll give the example of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What was it that they changed their name and they changed the language that they spoke? They specifically would change
Mm-hmm.
it into into the foreign language, and this is because they're trying to go into change their ethnicities. They're trying to get them to assimilate
Mm-hmm.
into that ethnicity, into that culture, into that ethnos. That's what they're
Yep.
trying to get them to do. It's one of the biggest tactics to go and to do that. It's incredibly important. And bridging right into that, when you go into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, except it was Belshazzar or Belshazzar for his name that it was changed to. They were also changed into the names that would represent foreign gods,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to Mishael, Azariah, and I don't remember what Shadrach's name was, as a Jew. Um,
You're losing points today.
I know I'm losing that. I was like, man, I can't think of what his name was. But when we look at that, they were changed from names that would represent the religion and the God of
Hmm.
Israel to the religions and the gods of the Neo-Babylonian Empire.
Yep. Well, and that's something we see, in all sorts of places. What did you do after you went from a pagan culture to a Christian culture? You adopted a what?
Name.
We don't use this term as much anymore, but we refer to, sometimes they're mistakenly called Western names, but we refer to them as Christian names. This is my
Right.
Christian name. Uh, it is a powerful thing for changing someone's identity and how they think about themselves. And again, language is a powerful factor, but language does not always mean people can have a shared language. And we're not talking
Hmm.
about sort of shared, we're talking about the same language,
Right.
just on a dialectical spectrum. So, I speak English, American English, and specifically Pacific Northwest American English, and someone from uh, Australia, they sound like a funny version of English to me with all
I was
sorts
going
of
to say
quirky
that
words.
you would never say that you're doing fair and Midland because you're not from the Midwest, but you know.
No, uh, so that's dialects, and is a
Yeah.
huge example of that in modern times and how extreme the division can be between people groups that physically look the same, that express their culture the same in architecture and clothing and all these other things. Obviously on a minor spectrum, but the spectrum is from that same people to the next named version of that people. They speak the identical language, completely mutually intelligible. The only difference is what they name it. But they are bitterly at each other's throats, and they have gone to war over it. And the only difference is religion. All you have to do is look at the Balkans. The Croatians, oh my goodness, there's going to be some Croatian and Bosnian and Serbian ancestor listeners that are going to get mad at me, but it's true. The only difference between a Bosniak, a Serbian, and a Croatian is not uh, any of the other factors in any significant degree. It's religion.
Right.
And up till the modern times, that was the definer. If you were from that region, part of this greater cultural group, but you were a Muslim, well, you were Bosnian.
Hmm.
Orthodox, you're Serbian. Catholic, you're Croatian. And the divisions became so strong, just be it based on that one factor, that they were willing to go into a very bloody war with one another.
Right. And, and so religion does then change the ethnos quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Now, does it automatically, again, just like the other one, does it automatically change your ethnos? Does it change your ethnicity?
It depends on what you mean by ethnicity.
It does depend, but in the sense of like nationality, like
Yeah.
people group, tribe, in
Right.
the sense of tribe, does it change your tribe,
It
your ancestry?
not necessarily. It can, but it doesn't necessarily change it. Obviously, in fact, in many ways, it doesn't. But like the example that you
No.
gave, it was the defining uh, shift there in the three different ethnos. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so with that, let's because we're starting to run out of a little bit of time here.
Yeah,
Um,
let's speed up a little bit. Do you want me to uh, summarize this next point and then just get into the second part that's meteor?
yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Okay, so we're not going to go into verses, but are interethnic marriages okay? We're going to go to the Bible. We're going to see what the Bible says about something, and then we're going to go to another example to kind of prove the question and other things. So the Bible, you can go to Exodus 34:10-16, Deuteronomy 7:1-6, Genesis 23:3-6. It very clearly forbids the intermixing of ethnicities, the intermarrying of peoples into Israel. They should not mix with the people around them. And that seems like it's creating an idea that ethnicity is a factor that you should consider when marrying. We're talking about specifically, let's talk about just the idea of like a tribal ethnicity, kinship. And yes, we can talk about the fact that Israel is a slightly different case, but there's something going on. We should talk about a couple points, but let's talk about this first one. Because on the point of, is it okay? We have examples of God forbidding it for Israel, but we also have counterexamples. It goes into another thing. Is ethnicity fixed? Are you stuck as one ethnicity?
You're
Well,
saying, is it broken? But no, that's not what you're talking about.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Genesis 23:7. So a couple verses, well, one verse after one of the ones I mentioned previously, you can read it. And it talks about the idea that certain ethnicities were allowed to intermix with after only 3 generations.
Huh.
So
That's an interesting
assimilation
thing.
assimilation is possible, but we need more to that. So, Sam, do you want to intro us in a little bit about Ruth?
Yeah. So Ruth, which also side note, we need to make like the Book of Ruth a woke proof text on that. The woke
Oh my goodness.
have been
Yeah,
really
they've
going after that.
refused. Yeah.
But anyway, the Book of Ruth. Essentially, here you have this Israelite family that went out, where you have these. You've got, wow, sorry, just completely blanked on like everybody's names here. But anyway, you've got Naomi, and you've got her 2 sons, Mahalan and Chilion. You have her husband too, who I'm blanking on his name at the moment. But you've got Mahalan and Chilion. They're the ones that really matter into the story. And they go and they marry 2 Moabite women. So one marries Ruth, the other one marries Orpah, and Mahalan and Chilion and their dad all die. And you have Naomi, you have Ruth, and you have Orpah, and they're there. And Naomi's like, I'm going back, going to be naming myself Mara because I'm really bitter. I'm going to go back. And Orpah and Ruth go and they cling to her to start off with. And she goes, no, go back to your own homes. You know, even if I were to have another child, you guys wouldn't get married to him anyway. You wouldn't wait around. So just go back to your own homes. And of course, Orpah weepingly says goodbye, and Ruth clings to Naomi instead and says, your God shall be my God, your people shall be my people. I'm coming with you. Wherever you go, I shall go. And basically, God curse me if I don't do that. And then she ends up
Mm-hmm.
getting married to Boaz, and eventually down the line becomes part of the line of Jesus, because that David comes from that line. But Orpah, which it's important to go and look at this too. It doesn't just say that she went back to her people, but also she went back to her gods, their people's
Mm-hmm.
gods there. And I think that's a really key, important thing when it comes to this, because it's that idea of assimilation and
Yep.
spiritual assimilation as well.
Yeah. You could, so obviously, assimilation. So over time, one people group getting supplanted by another. Their language gets removed, their cultural distinctiveness gets removed, their religion gets removed, they assimilate, and everything that made them one ethnicity is gone.
Right.
But there's another type of assimilation. Ruth was able to bypass
The
God's
3 generation.
commands. Well, she's a Moabite. They're
Mm-hmm.
forbidden to ever marry.
Yeah.
They're never allowed to intermix. Uh, so she should never be allowed to marry an Israelite, let alone, because that would make her children unclean. that would make David unclean. Eventually, that would make Jesus unclean. But we know David, only a couple generations later, isn't. He's fine.
Right.
The key factor is Ruth said, I am no longer a Moabite. I reject that as my tribe, and I reject that as my religion. I am now an Israelite. Your people are now my people. I am now an Israelite who believes in Yahweh, who believes in the God of Israel. So, how do you bypass the command of they can't just naturally assimilate the Moabites? Well, it's you go, I'm no longer a Moabite. I reject that
Right.
and I adopt this new faith, this new identity, this new people. I am now, for all intents and purposes, an Israelite. And that's how she's treated.
Yes.
Is there something New Testament wise? Because obviously, oh no, that's Israel. Well, on the religion side, don't be unequally yoked.
Right.
As Christians, we're commanded not to marry non-believers.
And that's because they are of a different spiritual ethnos in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. Um,
Which, do you have any verses that prove that point, that there's a spiritual ethnos and Christians are a spiritual ethnos?
so 1 Peter 2:9 tells us that we're a spiritual ethnos. And I believe this is the verse that goes and says that we are goes through, it says several things, like we're a royal priesthood, we're a holy nation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we see that there is that idea of that spiritual ethnos. Now, this isn't to go and to spiritualize everything and to say that there aren't physical people groups, because sometimes that's where people go and they take it, and then all of a sudden here they start using this for like a globalism type thing. But that's not what we're saying at all. In fact, I think it'd be really good to kind of look at the Apostle Paul. I mean, if you
Mm-hmm.
want to go more over this verse, that's fine. But I
No,
think it'd be really
I
good
think there's a
to
couple more points that we wanted to talk about, but frankly, they're abused by woke people, so I think we can just talk about them
right,
next week.
right. Um, but do you want to break down the different ethnoses that the Apostle Paul had? Because I
Not
think
just
this is fascinating.
Yeah, because it's not just stuff he had; it's stuff he claimed he still had as a Christian. As a Christian, he still
Right,
claimed to be a Roman citizen, despite
right,
claiming that his true citizenship is in heaven. He didn't renounce his Roman citizenship. He was
right. So, so,
still.
we, so we have the spiritual ethnos, right? Paul was a Christian, the greatest
Mhm.
church planter.
Yep,
Then he's a Roman citizen. What kind of ethnos is that?
that's his political ethnicity, if you want to put
Yeah,
it that way. Uh, but then he also makes it very clear that the Jews are still his brothers in the flesh. He's no longer physically, his kinship is still Jewish,
right.
but it's only in the flesh. And
And so
even when
that's
he talks about the Jews and his love for his brothers, again in the flesh, and he makes that clear, he goes back to that there's a separation. There's a more important separation between him and them. And his desire is that he wants to bridge that. He'd give up his own life, his own
it
salvation,
says yeah,
if
he'd
it
be
meant that they could
accursed.
come to
Yeah.
Christ. Yeah. So because he sees that there's a better identity, a better nationality, a better ethnicity, and that's
Mm-hmm.
his spiritual one, his Christianity.
Right. It and so there does end up being a hierarchy within these as well, but you do see, like you said, there was a political ethnicity, an ethnicity in the flesh of what people group he would naturally be from, and then there is also the spiritual ethnicity, and that's why a lot of times we would say it depends. It depends.
Hmm.
What are you using? What is the context
Yeah.
behind these questions when people go and ask that? And it is important that we understand these contexts. And I think that that's really what we're going to see next week is that, well, some people just like to abuse this. That's one thing that we're going to see. Some people just like to
Yep.
abuse this, but we're also going to see they try to interchangeably use a word sometimes and just make it fit to whatever they're trying to make it fit to, but not
Yep.
actually using this in a contextual, in the sense of really looking at the context of what we're talking about or what is being talked about within the Bible. And they just try to kind of make square pegs fit round holes sometimes with that. Um, but I hope that you understand a little bit of what biblical ethnos and biblical ethnicity is in looking at that, and understand, I think it's really important when it comes to this. We're all from one blood. On the value side of it, there is equal value. We all come from the same biology. When you're looking at ethnicity, if you've been using it interchangeably as a synonym with race, and you've been associating race with certain physical characteristics, that's not in any sense biblically what ethnos is.
Yeah,
Would you,
frankly, when you look at it, kinship is honestly one of the relatively lower points of what an ethnicity is.
right.
Things like language and especially religion. Religion is the number one definer of things. Now, again, Israel's a slightly special case, but even in what defines an ethnicity, it's hard for dictionaries to define it because they're coming from a secular point of view. But when we put it into a Christian point of view, it makes us a lot easier to see things because we're going to put them into a hierarchy. What is most important? And unfortunately, people go to, well, they go to race, modern idea of race, and they fall victim to the idea of ethnic partialism
Hmm.
because they put physical characteristics above the more important things. They put physical characteristics above perceived physical characteristics. Again, I hope I showed you some people that
Yeah.
break your ideas of that somewhat, but they put those above more important factors.
Right.
And for us as Christians, our most important identifier does need to be with Christ. So even in the context of different uses of ethnicity, we should still go, yeah, I'm Welsh, Swedish, French, Scottish, 128th Cherokee. Uh,
Elizabeth
but
Warren.
but that's vague genetics. I don't get to
Right.
put that ahead of my. I don't get to go like fly over to Sweden and be like, my people, and even America. I don't get to go. People up here in the Northwest. Oh, my people. No, my important thing is that I have a new people, and I care. I care more. This is not wrong. This is the exact same Paul says. I care more about people in the Northwest. I care about how lost there is, how much lostness there is up here in the Pacific Northwest. I care about that more than I care about Iowa. I'm sorry,
Ouch.
Sam, because these are, according to the flesh and according to culture and according to specific language, so accent, these are my people.
Right.
But Sam, you're more important than they are because you're the I almost said the people. Sam, you're the people. But
I
Sam, I'm
always
going to
wanted to
spend
be the
eternity
people.
with you. I'm
Right.
going to spend eternity with you. You are my brother. You are my new kin. You are my new family. That identifier is superior. We also can't, again, we can't use ethnicity to just be like physical trait. That's ethnicity.
Right.
It's going to
There,
get you tied up in all sorts of knots.
right. And that's why we have to go and look at what is the context that we're going and looking at this, and we're talking about it. And even
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it's even bound by time. Not
Mm-hmm.
not just location, not just religion, not just language, but bound even by time when we go and we look at that ethnicity. Now, of course, that spiritual ethnicity that we have, in that sense, it's not going to be bound by time because we are going to have an eternity there. That, of course, transcends time in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. But when we're looking at those physical ethnicities, they are bound by time. And I'm
Yep.
excited to kind of explore this a little bit more and look at really how people misuse this because I do think we've
Yeah.
gained a pretty good basis and foundation biblically for this.
Yep.
But as we close, I just want to encourage you that if you found this helpful, leave us a comment, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's contacting us at contactwokepedia@gmail.com. Once again, that's contactwokepedia@gmail.com, or wherever you see our content. Maybe it's at Rumble or Spotify, or you're listening to it on um, podcast, wherever you get your podcast from. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're thinking about this. But also, we hope that you tune in next week because we're going to be back on the Wokepedia stuff. And so it's going to be interesting to really look at how the woke are misusing this and how other people have really used the same, fallen into the same problems. But
Hmm.
I don't remember how we or what tagline we use for the Gospel Alliance. So I'm just going to stick with my normal one and say, keep standing for the truth.
I got one for you. Remember, alliances are better than coalitions.